You're watching Toronto Sports Rush on the Bet Rivers Network.
Welcome to Toronto Sports Rush, brought to you by the Bet Rivers Network. My name is Kyle Andrew, and joining me today is Torontonian, Don Mills native, and the only man to be the GM of both the New York Rangers and the New York Islanders, of course, culminating with that incredible Stanley Cup victory with the 1994 Rangers, Mr. Neil Smith. Neil, how are you today?
I'm good. I don't often get to brag about being from Toronto and Don Mills, so that's why I wanted you to mention that because, you know, I think a lot of people over my career now think I'm an American from New York. And, you know, because I've been there so long. And I love to get that in and talk about my upbringing in Don Mills.
Oh, for sure. You got to talk about the man, not just the resume. And even though your resume is so New York-based, we thought you would maybe be the perfect person, given your experience, given your architecture with that Rangers team, given what you've done, to discuss what the Leafs need to do, should do, or could do in this offseason leading into next year. And I want to start by, you know, let's think a little bit about what this Florida team has done since the Leafs series. They flattened Carolina. They're handling Edmonton quite well, an Edmonton team that on paper has a lot of similarities to Toronto. If you're the Leafs brass, if you're the Leafs fan base, if you're the Leafs players, is it time to just take a deep breath here and realize we're a little closer than we think? Like, where does this team stand right now? Why is the Florida team built for playoff success, and what are the Leafs missing from that equation?
It's interesting because in my view, the Toronto situation is an impossible situation with their fan base and the media and everything, and everyone wanting a head on a pole every year that they don't win the cup. Last year, it was a coach that had done a really good job for them in Sheldon Keefe. I can't imagine someone doing a better job than he had done, and yet he gets offed because he loses in double overtime in Game 7. And then this year, they got to get rid of somebody, so now it's Brendan Shanahan's turn because he's been there and the Shana plan doesn't work and blah, blah, blah. Never mind the fact that he's the president of the club. They've made more money than any team in the league. They got a bigger fan base. They sell more stuff. And I thought that was his job. He wasn't really the guy that made the hockey decisions. He left that up to either Lou Lamoriello, Kyle Dubas, or now Brad Treliving. But you have to have a head on a pole in Toronto, so now it's Shanahan's turn. What I think about their hockey team is I think the thing that they're missing, or not that they're missing, excuse me, but the thing that they could use a bit more of is a Craig Berube on the ice and the one behind the bench who did a real good job, I think. But it appears to me that the player base that they have, other than, you know, some of the players like Ekman Larson, yes, and others that have Stanley Cup experience, their main cogs in the wheel have not had any playoff success. Mm-hmm. And so therefore, it's really hard when times get tough, when they're up 2-0 on Florida, to say the right things in the locker room to make sure that you win Game 3 or you at least win Game 4. They don't have that experience. I think John Tavares is I really admire what he did this year. I admire the way he handed off the captaincy to Matthews. I admire how he played this year under the circumstances he was in, and I think he's been a great Toronto Maple Leaf, but he hasn't won, and perhaps that's why he can't relay the message accurately. And Matthews, of course, being a new captain and a young player, doesn't have that experience. So in my view, what they need in there is some leadership that has won in the past and can settle down the ship, because there's no ship that goes through more flux when times get tough than the Toronto Maple Leafs, because the groaning of the fan base and the media and the whole atmosphere in Toronto is incredible.
Yeah, and so let's transition to the coaches first here, because you're correct in saying that Sheldon Keefe did do a good job. This is a playoff team that, like you said, a double overtime loss. So they bring in Berube, and the consensus all season long and even into the offseason is that Berube is the right man for the job here. That's been my opinion, and that's been a shared opinion by many. The question is it a fair question to ask if the roster they ended the season with is the right fit for him instead of him being the correct fit for the current roster? Do they need to make changes that better align with his coaching style?
That's an interesting question, and I'll tell you why. Because last year we had Doug Armstrong on our show early in the season, and it was great because he had just done those free agent signings, and we got to talk about that. And then I got to ask him about Craig Berube and how he thought. I said, Craig Berube's going from a lunch pail gang that you had in St. Louis that, won that game, got from out of the playoffs to winning the Stanley Cup all in the same season. And then, or last overall, actually, to winning the Stanley Cup in the same season. And they've never been a star-studded team, the St. Louis Blues. They've had a high work ethic, which is what Craig Berube's known for in his career. And I said, how will Craig adapt to having these players? And Doug Armstrong said, it's not how Craig's going to adapt to his players, it's how his players will adapt to him. He will make them adapt to him. And I thought that was a really good answer. And I really thought that that's what I saw during the season with Toronto, was that his players were going to have to adapt to him. And therefore, Matthews was not going to score 69 goals, but he was going to score, 39 or 40, but he'd be better defensively. And the same with Nylander and Marner and so on. And for the most part, I think we did see that. But I think you're right. I think that you've got to give the coach, in some cases, more pieces that fit his style of what he envisions as the team that can win. Because if you're, I used to say, take away all the excuses. I don't know if you guys remember ancient history, and back in '94 when we made all those trades at the deadline, and I traded Tony Amonte, which I didn't want to do, to Chicago for Noonan and Matto. I traded Mike Gartner to Toronto for Glenn Anderson, another trade I really didn't want to do. I like Mike Gartner, but I didn't mind that as much because they were both they were both veteran guys, and I wasn't losing all the years I was losing with Amonte. But my point was that I said behind the scenes was I'm taking away all his excuses. I don't want any more excuses. That Gartner's not the right guy, that Amonte can't play, and this and that. I said he's now there's no excuse. He's got everybody. And I think to some extent they're going to have to do that with Craig. Not that Craig has excuses, and I don't mean it like that, but you've got to give him what he thinks he can win with, so that now the onus is on him to not to win necessarily the cup, but to take that and carry it forward in the way that he thinks he can do it.
So let's transition that then to what is obviously the biggest piece of the offseason puzzle for the Toronto Maple Leafs. Of course, it's Mitch Marner. Is this a question, or is this a matter of no one's questioning whether he's an elite A-list hockey superstar? He is clearly that. He has clearly performed very well for the Leafs most of the time, regular season. Is this just one of those situations where not all elite players fit into every roster as well as they could? Is there maybe a better fit for the Leafs with new personnel, or a better fit for Marner somewhere else?
I think it's the latter. What I've heard all season was that Mitch doesn't like the way he's treated in Toronto, his hometown. He doesn't think he's treated fairly. He thinks that every time something goes wrong, they'll always get down on him quicker because he's from Toronto. And he might want to leave and go somewhere else where he's not the hometown kid, and he can try something new and let his talent come out without being put under the microscope like he feels he is in Toronto. Mm-hmm. Being a Toronto guy, I can say that I'm sure I would have felt a lot more pressure being GM of Toronto Maple Leafs in the 90s than I would have feeling being GM of New York Rangers. Yet, because I'm not from New York, I'm from Toronto. So I can try to empathize with him in that regard. The thing that's really hard for me to understand is why Toronto will allow a talent of that level that was their draft pick to walk away for nothing. And yes, they're going to have to fill in for him. I know that Craig Berube really likes Mitch Marner. I think he likes. I know he likes him a lot, and really would love to have him, keep him. But what I've heard all year long is that it's really not the club that's not wanting to sign Mitch. It's Mitch that didn't want to sign with Toronto, so they tried to keep everything quiet and keep the ship steady and not have that controversy out there, if you notice, the Leafs sort of dampened that whole situation all year, and nobody made it that big of a deal out of it. Like if you've got a guy coming up to free agency that's an all-star like he is, that plays 5-on-5, power play, penalty kill, over 100 points, everybody should have been screaming, like, when are you getting this guy signed? And I'm not there, so you tell me if I'm wrong, but I didn't sense there was that outrage that he wasn't signed, and that everybody was just saying, oh, don't worry, it's okay. And now, I mean, look, we're only, a couple of weeks from free agency. They're not signing him. He's leaving. So,
yeah, and I think what you just alluded to there, I can comment on a little, because we did shows about the Leafs all season long, and I think one of the reasons that it never really garnered a lot of traction, why isn't he signed, is because the job Berube did with this team this year, they never really had any extended losing streaks. They were never bad for long stretches, which we all know it's not 2 games in a row where the Toronto media flares up. It's those stretches where they lose 6 of 7 and don't look good doing it, which they never had this year. So the speculation on all things across the Leafs media coverage was pretty temped down until the second round of the playoffs and the way they ended. And speaking to, your insiders have reported to you that Marner was not happy the way he's being treated in his hometown. Well, look at the way things ended. Having your jersey thrown on the ice, being booed by the hometown crowd, being very, like, the whole team was being crushed at the end of that game, at the end of those 2 games, really, 5 and 7. But it was really directed towards him in that moment. And that probably was enough to scare him out of town. I also can't see him re-signing here.
Yeah, I would say that probably put the icing on the cake. But one comment also I could make, Kyle, is you bring up a good point. They had no extended losing streaks during the regular season. Mm-hmm. So what does that also mean? That also means that they didn't face a lot of adversity during the regular season. When did they face adversity? Well, they won their first 2 games against Florida, and then all of a sudden, they let 2 slip away, and then they come home where they should have home ice advantage, and they get hammered horribly, 6-1. They go down and win a game and get everybody back thinking, okay, we're going to be okay. And they come home and get hammered again. It's almost unthinkable how badly they lost those 2 games. But could that be because that locker room hadn't faced that kind of adversity all season long, and that they couldn't handle that adversity once it showed up in the playoffs because they weren't used to it? I don't know. We're not in there, obviously, but I know that that's a theory that we've held over decades with teams, that teams lose in the playoffs when they're supposed to win. Let's say they're on their way to being a cup team down the road, and they have that 1 year where they lose and they go home just devastated, and that adversity leads to success a year or 2 later. So I'm not saying that's the case with Toronto. I'm just saying that adversity piece has been a theory that we've used for years.
Yeah. So Neil, let me take that. When you go back, the team you architected in 1994 that eventually won the Stanley Cup, they were known as much for their grit as skill, as their hard work, as their leadership on and off the ice, both on the ice and in the boardroom throughout the whole. It was a very complete team, very New York style team. It had all that grit. It just did. It just really fit the franchise well. What pieces from that formula are the Leafs missing that you would install here in Toronto?
Well, I'm going to give you an easy one, which they can't do, but Messier was, was a huge piece of this. I mean, they don't have a Messier. Maybe,
and I don't think anyone would call Austin Matthews a Mark Messier type either. Then what do they do?
Well, and you're not going to go find one. I mean, Nate McKinnon is not going to show up in Toronto, and you can go to other power forwards. I love Nyes, by the way. I think he's going to be outstanding for Toronto for a long time. And he is that type of player you just described of the Rangers from back in the 90s. Mm-hmm. We had those kind of guys. I don't want to say what names because I don't know, but, Mess certainly played like that and passed that on to a lot of people. It's really hard because where do you go out and grab guys that have Stanley Cup or winning experience that are veterans and plug them into the lineup? Do you go and say, well, Sam Bennett, we'll throw everything at Sam Bennett? Well, he's doing well in this year's playoffs, but he's not, an 80s Edmonton Oiler or you know what I mean? Like, he's not a perennial. Certainly if you could get Barkov, which you can't. I mean, so I don't know where we fantasize that the Leafs could go and get this guy. Matthews is going to have to grow into a warrior, a winning warrior somehow. Like, somehow.
Do you think he can? Do you think that's in him?
I don't know him personally, and I hate to be one of the guys that talks about a guy that he's never even met. And
sure,
it doesn't look that way to me from the outside. The one thing that I worried about when the Leafs drafted him, and I've never said this before, but I always thought this, was he's from Scottsdale, Arizona. Is he really going to have the love for the original six and Toronto in particular let's leave Canadians out of it, that a Northeastern American or a kid from Boston or that would have? Or is he, when it comes time to become a free agent, going to say, well, I want to get back to the States? I don't know that. I don't know him. So I'm not saying that's true. I'm just saying I thought about that as things went on. So, it is going to be incumbent upon Matthews. And by the way, I know everybody was mad at Marner or whatever, but if you're going to be mad at somebody, be mad at the guy that gets the most money, right? Like that's the guy that's got your ticket money in his pocket. Mm-hmm. It's not Mitch Marner. I mean, he makes a good amount of money, but I don't think that's really fair to go at Marner. First of all, Marner is on a cup-winning team. Marner's not your first-line center. No. Like there's no way. Because he's not big enough and strong enough and powerful enough. But he is a great element on a Stanley Cup team, for sure, because he's so good. I mean, he could play for – how much would he upgrade Edmonton? And how much would he upgrade Florida right now? If you could throw him into this series, he'd be fantastic. Mm-hmm. And Nugent Hopkins is doing a great job for Edmonton, and I don't know what the difference is in the size between those two guys, between Nugent Hopkins and Marner. So getting back to your question, I don't know how you go out and get that guy. I just know somehow they're going to have to get that ingredient into the locker room, whether it's the guys that are already in there or they're bringing other supplements in to create that atmosphere in that locker room.
Yeah, I think for a lot of people, the answer to this question was Craig Berube. Like the toughness he brings and the calmness he brings. He was very good at dealing with the Toronto media, very level, very even, didn't lose his temper, which is definitely needed in that market. And then you have an Austin Matthews type who we're never going to compare to Mark Messier. He's not the same type of player, but he did adjust his game to Berube's style this year. He scored less goals, but He was a better two-way player. There's no doubt about that. And everyone kind of believes he was fighting off some injuries this year, so he still had a great campaign for a team that could have gone further. And as you say, it depends what the market has. Maybe they have maybe Nyes is the guy who can emerge as that grit, as that toughness. But he's not going to be the best player on their team, and he's probably never going to be the best player on a Stanley Cup team. Is that fair to say?
I think so. I think so in today's hockey. Yeah. I mean, I think I don't see him as a superstar. I see him just as let's use Adam Graves as an example. Mm-hmm. I mean, okay, just pulling a guy from my past. A really great character guy, powerful guy, a guy that you won't take any crap. I mean, we saw that in the Florida series. He knocked guys on their ass that came to hit him. They went down. I love that. And I think he's going to be a huge piece of the team going forward. Mm-hmm. And Austin will grow into it more. And I agree with you that I thought Berube was great, the way he handled the media, the way he handles the bench during the games, his composure on the bench during the games. I thought he was tremendous. I mean, just the old school guy that was there, chomping down on the gum. I thought he did a real good job, and I was as stunned as anybody to see those two home game performances, and especially at home. I just can't imagine, and I said this during those games, I said, I can't imagine being the GM of a team that, loses 6-1 at home in the playoffs. Like I went through a lot of tough nights at Madison Square Garden, and there were some nights I wanted to duck underneath the desk because we had stunk it out. And one night Mario Lemieux scored 4 goals on us in our own building, and I think we lost 10 something. And I just wanted to get a bulletproof vest on and get out the back door.
For sure. Well, let's transition from there to a place where the Leafs, arguably have an embarrassment of riches, and that's not only on where it comes to how much they're paying their goaltenders. They have 2 1A and 1B goaltending situation right now. Both guys' values very high because their contracts are very low. Looking in the offseason right now, would you keep them both, or would you try and move one of these pieces while they're so valuable on the open market?
Well, I wouldn't move Stolarz for sure, because I think you finally found a guy, or Toronto finally found a guy. And by the way, I shouldn't have left him out. He does have a Stanley Cup ring and was on the Florida Panthers last year as a backup to Bobrovsky. And he went through some adversity in that series when they lost 8-1 to Edmonton in the final, and then ended up going 7 and winning 2-1 so he's faced some of that. However, that's tough for a goaltender to be that guy. I don't know if you should move Wall. I think one thing that we found out lately in the whole league is that goaltenders are being injured a lot more often than they ever were before, and that I remember that Toronto signed Matt Murray to be goaltender number 3. In case they needed him, right? And they did need him at time. He did come up and play games for the Leafs as goaltender number 3. And usually goaltender number 3 is your prospect goalie, right? It's not a veteran guy that's in the minors. So I'm not sure that you can do that given the fact that there's so many goaltender injuries now, and you got to be very careful, because if something happens, if let's say you traded Joseph Wall and you have Joe Blow as the backup now to Stolarz, and it's clearly 1 and 2 instead of 1A and 1B, and Stolarz gets hurt, and you're not sure you can win a lot of games with number 2, you're in trouble, right? So I think in today's NHL, you might need a 1A and 1B in case of injury.
Yeah, and there was very much that situation all season long for the Leafs, where you could see the team playing in front of whoever was in net was very confident about who was behind them, and that says a lot about the ability of both Wall and Stolarz. And then back to Sam Bennett, maybe signing him is the best thing you can do to protect your goaltenders, because he's still the number 1 leading cause of goaltender injuries in the NHL as it stands as of now. So maybe they just sign Sam Bennett for the big bucks just to protect the 1A and 1B. Who knows, right? That might be the best play for them. We have these types of conversations about this Leafs team, and it just really kind of seems like, to kind of cap this all off for us, they're very close, aren't they? There's just the parts they're missing are very, very minor. Would you agree?
Absolutely. And the thing that drives me nuts about Toronto, and I'm not a Leaf fan. I stopped being a Leaf fan when I was about 10 years old, and I became a Chicago Blackhawks fan. And then once I got to a maturity, I was just a fan of whatever team I was working for or was with. But and now I just watch the league as a whole and hope that my predictions are right, and that's who I cheer for. But what drives me nuts about the Leafs is there are probably at least 30 cities that would love to have the Leafs team as their team. I mean, I'd much rather have the Toronto Maple Leafs in totality than have the Carolina Hurricanes. And Carolina's good contender. I'd much rather have them than the LA Kings, and I'd much rather have them than the Vegas Golden Knights. And that's my opinion is that the Toronto Maple Leafs are an elite team in the NHL, and they're a contender to win the cup. They're certainly right there with the Tampa Bay Lightning. I mean, I'm not saying you'd trade the Tampa Bay Lightning for Toronto or vice versa. They do have Kucherov and Hedman and other great players on Tampa Bay. So I could get into a good argument about which team's better or worse. All I want to say is Toronto doesn't understand how lucky they are to have the team they have in this era. This is a golden era for the Toronto Maple Leafs. I mean, they're in the playoffs easily year after year. They're usually, they're not even a wild card. They're in the top three. And
division winners.
Exactly. And that's the first division they've won in how many years has it been since they won the division?
A significant number of
now,
them. Yeah.
And now what's sad is that you're going to get to opening night next season when it should be glorious to raise that banner. And everybody's going to be bemoaning and groaning and, we lost that, blah, blah, blah. Well, come on, guys. I mean, there's one team that wins, in 32. And be patient. Don't make these guys do stupid things. Because if you're the media and the fans, don't make your people do stupid things. And you're going to if you keep this craziness going, because that's why the Rangers went so long and are going so long again, because the craziness of New York infiltrates the situation and it makes the people that have control do stupid things.
Yes. Movements for the sake of movement isn't necessarily progress. It's just to appease the headline writers. It's not.
Yeah, and change for the sake of change is not a winning recipe. It really isn't. Cooler heads, people, making sure that their decisions that they make are based on fact and good scrutiny of it, and not just emotional things that says, well, the fans are going to be so pissed off if we don't do something. Well, so what?
Yeah, everyone's a GM in their armchair. You know what I mean? So what?
And by the way, how many people do you think are going to cancel their season tickets in Toronto?
0.
Yeah. So, from a business perspective, if you're worried about your country club friends coming up to you and razzing you about why you can't get your team to win, meaning, the people in the upper echelon of the Leafs, MLSE and all that, well, you're never going to win. If that's all you're concerned about, you'll never win. Let the hockey people make the decisions they need to make to try to progress it forward, and then you judge the hockey people as to whether or not they're doing a good job.
And a little bit of perspective is necessary here to kind of bring this back full circle. They lost in 7 games to the defending Stanley Cup champion, albeit twice in very ugly fashion. But the Florida Panthers, they decimated Carolina a couple of times the same way, and they just handed the Oilers a loss that's very similar. So the Leafs are an elite company of teams that can't solve the Florida Panthers problem. It's not really the other way around. Florida has just continually now established themselves as the elite of the NHL.
And especially in playoff hockey.
Yes.
The league has changed. So what's being proven this year is you've got 2 teams in the final that neither one had home ice advantage until now. They had to give home ice advantage to one, and so Edmonton got it by virtue of being a few points ahead of Florida. Just think about that. Nobody mentions that Florida is taking this whole playoff with no home ice advantage. They're doing it again, that's possible to do now. So this league is not a league where you're going to say, well, the Winnipeg Jets, I got my money on the Winnipeg Jets. Look at them. They're great. Well, they are great, but it's a different game when the playoffs start. And the Florida Panthers are built for playoffs, and they always have been. And that's the way Paul Maurice coaches them. That's the group they've got. And you can't just say, well, okay, let's throw away that division title we got and make it a better playoff team. That's pretty hard to do, right? So they're an elite company for sure, and I got to tell you that there's a ton of cities out there that would die to have Austin Matthews, William Nylander, Mitch Marner, Stolars, I can go on, Riley.
You could go nice. You can just keep going
nice, there. Yeah, and yeah, you can go on and on. So, calm down, everybody. This isn't the end of the world.
Absolutely. And I thank you for being our guest today, Neil. I'm sure we're going to have you back on very shortly after the free agency window opens. There's going to be a lot of movement this offseason with the Leafs and beyond, and there's going to be a lot to talk about. But I think this chat today kind of gave people at least the ability to grab a little perspective on what we've actually seen here. And your expertise, again, after architecting that incredible 1994 Stanley Cup champion New York Rangers team, and your kindness being a Don Mills boy yourself as it relates to the Leafs are appreciated. And of course, if you have yet to subscribe to the Toronto Sports Rush channel, please take the time to do so now. Turn on notifications and like this video. Leave us a comment. Perhaps we'll respond to it. Neil, thank you again for joining me once again. I'm Kyle Andrew. Toronto Sports Rush is brought to you by the Bet Rivers Networks. We'll see you guys soon.
Thanks for watching Toronto Sports Rush on the Bet Rivers Network.